It's a party at the retirement home. Chris Weidman has returned to us, and he's fighting at UFC 309 in November on the John Jones card, and he's fighting Eryk Anders. We got Eryk Anders, mediocre, I'd say, not too great on the feet, not too great on the ground, a little slow, but he's got power, so I guess that's one thing. And then you got Chris Weidman, who's like 200 years old. I like to call him Chris Eyedman because the eye poking is really just egregious, and how he won that fight against Bruno Silva was quite a fucking disgrace. But hey, they gave it to him. Chris Weidman gave Bruno that 1-2 eye poke, that jab cross eye poke to the eyes of Bruno Silva, and the refs called it a TKO, called it a clean TKO. Really fucking ridiculous. But yeah, that leads me to my next statement. I think this fight, like the outcome of this fight, depends on how well the reffing is. If this fight is reffed better than Chris Weidman's last fight, I think they'll give it to Bruno Silva. Given how old Chris Weidman is, I'm a big advocate for the age gaps. I think the older you get, the worse you get, the slower you get. Chris Weidman is really fucking old. So for the fight game, he's 40. 40 is not like crazy old, but for the fight game, it's old. So yeah, I think he's gonna come in there slow. Chris Weidman was able to hold his own against Bruno Silva. Even though the eye pokes were a big thing, Chris Weidman was still kind of there. So he didn't look too much like Tony Ferguson looks now, where he's like, can't really throw anything as far as punches go, and he's just kind of walking around the cage, and that's really it. He's not as bad as Tony Ferguson is, right now. Tony Ferguson is a legend, don't get me wrong, but he's old. Chris Weidman's old too. So I'm going to go with Eryk Anders. I think, as mediocre as Eryk Anders is, I think he'll be able to land on Chris Weidman. And again, he's got power, so I think he'll cause some damage. And I think if he's not as good as Weidman on the feet, he could definitely shoot for takedowns and try to bring Chris Weidman to the ground and win that way too. I'm gonna go with the age factor. I'm gonna choose Eryk Anders. Chris Weidman, again, he's a former UFC champion. I'm sure he would have had a lot more accolades if he didn't get his shins kicked in half by Uriah Hall. But unfortunately he did. He was out, came back, really didn't look as good, still doesn't really. I think Bruno Silva would have won that fight if Chris Weidman didn't land that 1-2 eye poke. But here we are. Yeah, should be a good fight. I think it'll be fairly competitive. I got Eryk Anders by decision. I don't think Eryk Anders is going to finish Weidman. And Weidman should really call it quits here. I don't really think he should go for another title run. I think he should really consider his health. He is definitely not fast enough to compete with the top the top middleweights. He just doesn't have enough to compete with them. But yeah, man, I was gonna call him a UFC. I guess he is a UFC legend. I wouldn't really throw the word legend around a lot, because I feel like to be a legend, you got to do a lot. And Chris Weidman was on the verge of doing a lot, again, before getting his shin snapped in half by Uriah Hall. So it's still good that he's back. I don't like seeing fighters take on too much damage, especially, when they're at or nearing retirement age. And Eryk Anders is no spring chicken either. He's like 36, 37, like he's older too, but he's still not as old as Weidman. And as much as as much as many UFC fans may want to hop on the Chris Weidman bandwagon because of, again, he's been a name long ago in the UFC and nostalgia and all this shit, and let's just let's get him to the top. He's old. He doesn't look great. He really doesn't. He doesn't look like the Weidman of old, but who would? When it's years later and they've got their shin snapped in half. or ankle. It was ankle or shin. It was lower leg. Really just clean break. But yeah, should be good. I think it'll be fairly competitive. I don't think either fighter will starch the other one. Again, given the getting up there in age and the mediocreness and all this other shit, it won't be like a Ribovics Zellhuber fight. That fight from UFC 306 that was really amazing and lightning fast. It was an all-out war. I don't think it'll be much of a war. It'll be competitive. There'll be a back and forth, but I think Eryk Anders will win off points or ground control. He could do either, really. Chris Weidman is just old. I think if the refs take away the eye poking, and Chris Weidman is penalized if he does attempt to eye poke Eryk Anders should take this fight. That's the bottom line of it. Let me know what the fuck you motherfuckers think. Like and subscribe. I love y'all.